Close. Sadly, the only thing the New York Giants are close to is the number one overall pick in the draft following their 34-7 loss to the Atlanta Falcons. Some thoughts on the latest disaster and where this franchise needs to go from here coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, folks, you know the drill at this point. Another week, another loss, another blowout loss. And the Giants in this week's 34-7 loss to the Atlanta Falcons, making all kinds of wrong history, bad history. So we're going to take a look at a little bit of that, because I do have to do a slight recap on this game, even though I'm sure, like me, you probably don't want to hear about it, but we're going to touch upon it just a little bit. In segment 2, we've got to take a look at Brian Daboll and what do they do with Brian Daboll. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Segment 3, General Manager Joe Schoen said during the bye week 5 weeks ago that this team was close. Well, I want to know close to what, as I'm sure you guys want to know. So we'll talk about that. And we'll also take a look at where Schoen stands. So that's our program for today. Again, welcome on in to everybody. All right, folks, 34-7 every week. It seems to be the same thing with this team. You see sloppy play. You see mistakes being made that really should not be made at this point in the season. For example, on the last drive, the Giants' last drive of this game, they had half of their penalties. I think it was 5 penalties. So they had 10 penalties altogether in the game. They had 5, 3 of which were false starts, right? Now, granted, it was garbage time. If they had scored on that drive, it wouldn't have mattered at that point. But the point being is you have the same stuff over and over and over. It's like rinse and repeat with this team. As a result, the Giants lost their 10th in a row, which is a new franchise record. They are now the number one overall pick in the draft, assuming that everything holds on the way it is. The Raiders won today, so the Giants are in sole possession of the first overall pick, which would make them, which would be the first time in their history since 1965 that they've held the first overall pick, and the first time in the modern draft era, the 7-round era, that they will have had the first overall pick, if again that holds up, which it should at this rate. They also made history today in that Drew Lock, the starting quarterback, threw 2 pick sixes. First time in a game since 2007 when Eli Manning did it against the Minnesota Vikings. First time a Giants quarterback, has thrown multiple pick sixes in a game. They have now had 5 of their losses in which they have failed to score more than 7 points. They have been outscored in their last 2 games by a combined 48 points. All right, so the Giants, they're just bad. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you all is well and they're just a quarterback away or they're just this away or they're fine. The status quo can remain the same. I'm not going to tell you that because I respect you guys and gals. You see what's going on. You see, how they're playing. You see the same things I'm seeing. Right now, granted, I might have in some cases a little bit more background which I try to, share with you guys. But the bottom line is this Giants franchise, it is broken. It is broken. And, you can look at any number of reasons for that. You can start with the fact that they don't have a quarterback, that they took the gamble on Daniel Jones, decided not to take a quarterback in this year's draft class, even though the class was rich with talent. Now, to be fair, you don't want to reach for a quarterback, especially in the first round. But you mean to tell me they couldn't take a quarterback and take a flyer on somebody? Spencer Rattler, I've mentioned, there were other guys maybe they could have taken a flyer on. I mean, I think, can't remember where I saw it, but I remember seeing that there are some teams that believe you take a quarterback every year because you never know. Worst case scenario, you draft a quarterback. If he doesn't work out, you move on. Or if he does work out and you have your franchise starter in place, then you trade the guy because teams are always going to be looking for quarterbacks. The Giants have not done that. They have hitched their wagon to Daniel Jones. He did not work out, and now they're left with basically Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, and Tim Boyle. And oh, by the way, can somebody please explain to me why, after Tim Boyle, considering that he didn't have a whole lot of time in this offense, why he looked so good last week against a tough Ravens team, but yet they went back to Drew Lock? I mean, I don't want to say that they're tanking, but gosh, you look at decisions like that and you say to yourself, what are they thinking there? Do they really think Drew Lock gives them the best chance to win? And interestingly enough, head coach Brian Dable, after the game, when asked about who the starting quarterback is going to be, he did not come right out and say it's going to be Lock. So it's going to be interesting to see who they start in these last two games. Up next, of course, they have the Colts at home, a team that they should beat. Should. But then again, they should have been a lot more competitive against the Falcons. And you know what I like to say, folks? Woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. And they didn't. So you have a team that it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. There's no salvaging anything left of this season. It's just a matter of, okay, just finish out the string, secure the first overall pick at the draft, and start using your assets, which include, I think it's like over 50 million, or it will be over 50 million in salary cap space to build up what you are missing, because this team is just not competitive. And look, I don't want to hear about injuries. All right. I know some of you are going to say, well, Pat, there's a bunch of injuries. They're missing Dexter Lawrence. They're missing Andrew Thomas. Bobby Okereke just went on IR this week. They're missing, Tyler Newman, you name it. Folks, the Giants last year had a bunch of injuries. All right. They went through multiple quarterbacks, just like they are this year. This year, more so by choices rather than injury. Okay. They had injuries last year, and they were still able to come up with 6 wins, which is 3 times the amount of wins they currently have. So if you have depth, reasonable depth on your roster, if you have coaching and development on your team, you should at least, you would think, be competitive and be able to maybe plug some of the holes that result because of injury. And the Giants just haven't been able to do that, which is really frustrating, which is really head scratching. And when you look at the big picture, that's one of the main reasons why this team has gone backwards. And it's not like the Giants don't have good coaches on their staff. They do. But for whatever the reason, they've gone backwards. And the results have just been horrendous. It's just been a long season. It's been a tiring season. It's been a frustrating season. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, it can't end soon enough this season because it's just been an absolute disaster. All right. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at Brian Dable. Should he stay or should he go? Folks, I hate to say it, but the evidence is piling up against him, and we will go over that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away over $30 million in rewards using or during Picksmas, and they're offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. And Prize Picks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up this week, folks, obviously Christmas is on Wednesday, so we won't have a show for you Wednesday. The Giants schedule, the media schedule is a little different this week. So we're going to have calls with head coach Brian Daboll on Monday. Tuesday is going to be regular locker room access. Usually that's a day off, but we're going to have regular locker room access. Wednesday, of course, is Christmas, so no show for us here. Thursday, crossover Thursday, Jake, Arthur, and I will be on with you as the Giants and Colts get ready for week 17. And then Friday, we'll have another show. I don't know what the topic's going to be yet, but I'll figure it out. I'm sure there'll be something to talk about. So, all right, let's talk about Brian Daboll. Now, I want to start off by saying it's the holiday season, and I don't usually like to sit here and say that somebody should lose their job. I don't think that's fair to somebody. I don't think it's, quite honestly, to be nice to do. But at the same time, it's all about performance. It's all about results. And if somebody isn't getting the results that are desired, you really have to start sitting there and thinking, do you have the right people in place? Now, here's the thing with Daboll. I do believe that Daboll is a good coach. I think, however, that there are things that maybe he's a little too stubborn on that are coming back to bite him. For example, he obviously decided to take over the play calling this year. And the play calling and the production has just been worse under his management, right? So it was a case of going down with the ship. And if he's going to go down with the ship, he's going to steer it. And boys, he's steering it into the ground. So I'd like to see him maybe, if he is brought back, which at this point, I can't honestly sit here and tell you that that's going to happen. There's a very strong case against that happening. But if Daboll is back, meaning ownership, needs to tell him, Brian, you turn over the play calling to an offensive coordinator and you manage the entire team, because this doing it, Daboll, let's face it, folks, he's not Andy Reid. He's not a superstar head coach where he can, he's earned his stripes to the point where he can do both and run a winning program. He just hasn't reached that level yet. So until that level gets there, I just don't think he should be calling plays if he is brought back, by the way. All right. Some other things that bother me about the job he has done. We are in week 16 of the season. We just finished week 16, and we are still seeing mistakes that should not be happening at this point in the season. False starts. Okay. Where's the discipline on this team? Illegal shifts. What did Malik Neighbors have 2? So now he's got 5, if I'm not mistaken, on the year. And I don't care if that was a result of, maybe, another receiver wasn't set or whatever the case may be. That should not be happening. These pre-snap penalties that continue to occur should not be happening in week 16 of the season. You want the team to start playing their best ball as you get to the end of the season. The Giants are playing backwards here. They're playing their worst balls as they get to the end of the season. And that's a concern. All right. Is Brian Daboll's voice being heard in the locker room by the players? Well, Daboll was asked that, and he believes that they are, based on how they're working and everything like that. Now, here's the thing. We in the media only get to see so many minutes of practice a day. We don't get to see the entire, session. We don't get to obviously sit in the meetings. So that being said, you kind of have to take Dable's word for it. But you look at the results and what you see on the field, and it's certainly fair to wonder, are they really hearing him anymore or have they tuned him out? You see Dable pop a cork. Like again today, he popped the cork when they didn't make there was one play, I forget where it was, but I remember he got all upset and he was yelling at Drew Lock. I think it might have been on one of the turnovers. Okay. Things are going to happen. And I get it. He's competitive, but you can't be popping corks like that. You want to pop a cork at the officials, fine. Everybody does it. But, you make a mistake, you learn from it and you move on. So that's a concern that keeps popping up. And here's the biggest thing, I mentioned before, the Giants, yes, they have injuries this year. I get that. But they had injuries last year. They had a historically bad offensive line last year, and they still won 6 games. This year, only 2. And they haven't even come close to winning anything since. All right. So injuries, I don't want to hear that as an excuse, because if you have depth, if you have talent that's been developed, you can overcome that. Instead, you're doubling down on things. Evan Neal, he was both Dable and Carmen Brasillo, the offensive line coach this past week, I should say last week, were asked about trying Evan Neal at guard. And they doubled down on him, saying he's a right tackle. Right now, he's a right tackle, blah, blah, blah. I thought, okay, well, maybe they brought up Tyree Phillips, so maybe they might think of plugging him at tackle, moving Evan Neal over to guard in case Jay Kubas struggled at left guard. No, it didn't happen. But you continue to double down and you see Evan Neal on the ground, you see inconsistent footwork. And how many more times do you have to be beaten over the head to realize that this guy is not playing in the right position? That maybe if you move him inside the guard, he won't have these false starts because he'll be closer and he'll be able to hear better or whatever the case may be. But it just seems like they double down on the same mistakes over and over and over. And at what point do you say, hey, guys, this ain't working. We got to try something else. And they haven't done that. And I don't know why. Stubbornness, perhaps. I don't know. But it's killing this team. Here's the other thing, folks. Again, I don't advocate calling for somebody to be fired. I really don't. I don't think it's fair, especially now around the holidays. But here's the thing. The Giants are approaching a situation where they're stuck between a rock and a hard place regarding their head coach. Do you keep Brian Dable and say, okay, you know what, Brian, we screwed up the quarterback situation. We didn't get a quarterback because we couldn't get a quarterback. We couldn't get the guy we want. So we'll get a quarterback next, in 2025. We'll let you develop him. We'll fix the roster and we'll see. Do you go that route? Or do you say, well, hey, Brian, you didn't develop Daniel Jones. You couldn't get Daniel Jones back to the 2022 version. You can't get, Locke or DeVito to play at, a better level than what they've been playing. So maybe we got to go in a different direction. All right. And then here's the other thing, folks. If you retain Dable and you say to him, okay, you know what? We'll retain you, but you got to make a change. You got to replace Mike Kafka, who's probably going to leave anyway. You got to rethink Shane Bowen as your DC. Maybe change up a few other position coaches. Now, think about this, folks. If you bring Dable back, how likely are you to attract really quality candidates to come here when your head coach situation could be one where the sky is now a lame duck next year, a make or break year? Do you want that stability? Do you want it, or that lack of stability? Do you want to uproot your family to come here knowing that there is a chance that if the team, stinks again next year, that they're going to sweep everything out and start from scratch? Probably not. So that's certainly something that has to be considered. And I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I mean, I know some of you are going to say, well, Pat, the answer is obvious. They've got to fire Dable. I go back to, when Bill Parcells was here and he went I think it was 3-12-1. And he would have been fired had, I think, George Young been able to convince Howard Schnellenberger to take the job. But Schnellenberger, I think, stayed. I believe he was with the University of Miami, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the team he was with. So they stuck with Parcells, and we all know Parcells went on to have a Hall of Fame career. So there's always that, that danger that, you pull the plug on Dable and, you never know what might have been. So what did the Giants do? Well, do they go back and say, okay, what was the reason we hired this guy? We hired him because he did good work with Josh Allen up in Buffalo, got him to play at a high enough level, worked wonders with an offense that was complete. With the Bills, I think it was in 2020, the Bills had like a top 3 offense, if not the top offense in the league. Do we stick with that or do we go in a different direction? Because admittedly, the quarterback situation has been a problem. Admittedly, the offensive line injuries have affected it. But then again, they don't have a whole lot of young quality talent in the pipeline. The defense has struggled, so do you say, okay, you know what? Shane Bowen's not fit for what, the talent that we have on defense. We go in a different direction. What do you do if you're the Giants? The easy answer is you tell Brian, thanks, but we're moving on. I don't know, and I know I'm going to catch flack for saying this, folks, but I don't know that it's as easy as saying that. And I know what the results say. I know what logic says. I know what, the circumstances say. But you have to kind of look at the whole picture. All right. And for me, I'm trying to keep emotion out of it. I know some of you are just so disgusted that you're like, fire everybody. And I get that. It's hard to be a fan of this team right now. But I don't know. I mean, my gut feeling right now, and I've said this before, with each passing loss, I think Dable's ground becomes shakier and shakier. I could see a scenario where he is not retained, because next year, this way the Giants will only owe him, I think, 2 years of salary, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had a 5-year contract. So he's just finishing up year 3. So they'll owe him 2 more years. But I don't know. These next 2 games, we'll put it this way, folks. Losing to the Falcons, to a rookie quarterback, this is a game that the team should have at least been competitive in. That's a big, big stain against Dable's record. All right. Losing to the Ravens last week, the Ravens, we all know, was a pretty good team. All right. If the Giants get blown out by the Colts next week, I think that's going to pretty much seal the deal. And the Giants go in a different direction, because for the finale against the Eagles, I don't see the Giants beating the Eagles, even if the Eagles play all their backups. So that's going to be interesting to see as well. All right, coming up next, some final thoughts as the Giants close out Week 16 in disappointing fashion. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I just have a few final thoughts on this Giants' latest loss that I want to talk about. At the top of the program, I asked the question, the Giants are close. They're close to what? All right, now I'm referring to, obviously, what General Manager Joe Schoen said during the bye week when he opined that we're close. He said that 5 weeks ago, 5 losses ago, he said that they were close. And at the time, a lot of people, myself included, were like, what exactly are you saying you're close to? Does it mean you have a foundation in place? Does it mean something else? Does it mean that you're on the verge of breaking what was the start of the losing streak? Whatever it was, I still don't know what they're close or what he was referring to. I mean, I think he was referring to the fact that they have a foundation in place, but here's the problem. The foundation that they have, it just seems like they keep ripping up the foundation and starting and adding new guys, right? So, you go back and you look at some of the leadership that they basically let walk out the door. That was leadership that was part of a foundation that was brought in by the previous regime. So they basically, Saquon Barkley, Julian Love, Xavier McKinney, Leonard Williams, all those guys have been sent packing or have walked out the door. All right. They've replaced those guys with like Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Andrew Thomas, who was a carryover, Dexter Lawrence, a carryover. Maybe that's what Joe Shane was referring to. I don't know. Was he maybe referring to the fact that they're close to getting the quarterback of their dreams? Because, 5 weeks ago, we didn't know where they were going to draft. Now it looks like they're going to be the first overall pick. Maybe that's what he was referring to. I don't know. But here's what I do know, folks. The Giants are not close right now to being any sort of a competitive football team. It's just what it is. Too many holes. Too many mistakes are being made week after week after week. The coaching, for whatever the reason, they just can't seem to get the best out of these guys, unlike last year when they did. And it's just resulted in a really, really forgettable 100th anniversary for this New York Giants franchise. A team that, once upon a time was just so storied, so, respected around the league. And it's interesting having conversations with some of you on social media, some of you who are old enough to remember the 1970s, the 15 years of lousy football. And you say, you know what, Pat, this is probably the worst in the 15 years of lousy football. I would say to that, maybe the 15 years of lousy football was worse because of all the moving around that the Giants had to do and the fact that they didn't have a home. But that being said, I'm not going to dispute that this last decade plus has been absolutely difficult for the Giants. I mean, with the exception of a couple of years here, 2016, 2022, the Giants have just been not very good. And, next week they'll host the Indianapolis Colts. I fully expect there will be another plane flying overhead with another message urging John Mara to fire everybody. And it's just going to be a long off season, folks. It's going to be a long, cold off season for a Giants team that just right now, I'm not sure what the direction is they're going to go in. And, look, even if they do get the quarterback of their dreams, there's no guarantee that guy's going to work out. Okay, we've seen it happen. They thought Daniel Jones was the quarterback of their dreams, and that didn't work out. They thought, a few years ago, Dave Brown was the quarterback of their dreams, and that didn't work out. So, you could sit there and you could say, well, fingers crossed that Shedeur Sanders or Jalen Milroe or Cam Ward turns out to be the guy. You can sit there and hope for that, but there's no guarantee. And that's what's scary, is that they don't have like guys in the pipeline so that if something doesn't something doesn't work out, they have a plan B. And one of many mistakes this team has made, and we'll just have to see what they do, what ownership, and it's going to start with ownership and whether or not they decide to keep both Shane and Dable or just Shane, or in an extreme case, maybe they keep Dable and they get rid of Shane. I don't think that'll happen. I think the most likely scenario is that they will keep Shane and get rid of Dable. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that's the most likely scenario. But it's going to be a very long and interesting offseason for the football Giants. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and spending part of your day with me. I will be back tomorrow with an all-new episode of Locked On Giants. So until then, have a good one.